So, um, now I'll talk about something really important, about the wealth. So that's the title of the panel. What does it mean to be wealthy? Why do we do it? Because we composed a new index. It's not like totally original. A new index measuring the wealth of the nations. So we tried to follow Adam Smith's suit in pursuing what's the wealth of the nation. And we thought that maybe there's something, those voices who say that, well, only GDP is not enough to measure the wealth of a country. You need to add some other factors into the calculations. So we did it. We divided economies into two parts. One is private sector, private expenditures, and the second is let's say, synthetic index of other indexes measuring quality of various public expenditures in 8 categories, such as security, health, education, and so on. So those indexes are internationally recognized publications. We put them all into one composite index. We add some economic evaluations, and what we got out of it is Wealth of Nation Index. We published yesterday a new edition, the 3rd edition of it. We started 3 years ago with that. So we take European Union and OECD countries into the list. Poland is around 27, ranked 27th, and 3 first countries are Ireland, Switzerland, and the United States. So it's obvious, on one hand you can say, but yet when you look deeper into those index, you will see kind of an interesting diversity among the results, especially in terms of quality of public expenditures. So, for example, due to the fact that we did this calculations for the 3rd time in a row, we can compare how various economies performed before, during, and after pandemic, and we can conclude whether which economies did well, which did poorly. So first of all, there is a consistent observation that the old Europe, the old part of European Union, has not performed too well during and after pandemic. The new part of Europe, so the central region of Europe, Poland included, has been performing comparatively well, but the United States is performing comparatively better over the years, those 3 years at least, than Europe as a whole. So United States is not like some say a fallen economy, you know, in decline or something, at least according to our index. It's quite optimistic view. And the thing with this division between private and public expenditures in the economy lets us see clearly who is really responsible for the growth and who is the motor, who is the engine. In case of Poland, because it varies from country to country, in case of Poland, during the last 3 years, it was the private sector. So the quality of our public expenditures were declining, and the private sector was the motor, the engine of the growth of the wealth of the country. So I advise you, I recommend reading all the index, looking in all the data, all the charts. It's accessible. You can access that on our website, wei.org.pl. So this is a short introduction. I decided not to go deeper into the details in order to proceed with more interesting discussion, in which we're gonna have a great guests, of course. Let me take the list in order not to make mistakes when introducing them. You already know Mr. Dan Mitchell, who is an economist and ex-Cato Institute fellow. Tomek Kwarciński, who is member of Polish Philosophy of Economics Network. He also works at Krakow University of Economics. He's an economist, and he also was helpful in organizing all the events, so thank you for that, by the way. We have Robert White, Dean of Faculty at the American University in Bulgaria. And Manolaci Christian, he is a historian and also a managing director of the Cluj-Napoca Urban Culture Center. Is that correct? Perfect. Okay, so first thing I'd like to ask you all in the audience, actually I have two questions. Can you please, each one of you, one by one, say the first word that appears in your mind when you hear the word wealth, the first association. Let's start with the cameraman.
Happiness.
Happiness, wealth, happiness. Peter. Money.
Life.
Life. Money.
Dragons.
Dragons. Okay. Dragons, yes, he said that, yeah. Money. Okay. Nothing? Nothing. Okay, it can happen. Huh? Time. Mm-hmm. Marcin?
Personal improvement.
Improvement. Viola? Long, healthy life. John? Achieving goal. Marcin?
Comfort.
All right. Okay. And now please name a person that you consider to be wealthy. It can be or should be a public figure in order to make it easier.
Bill Gates.
Is he happy?
I think he is.
Okay. Peter?
Elon Musk.
Elon Musk. Yes, he does have money, so the question would be stupid. Yeah?
Yeah.
Again?
The first association was Bill Gates.
Bill Gates. Okay. What did you say about the association with the wealth?
The love of his life.
Life. Yeah, yeah. But you mean a good life? By life, a good life. Okay, a good life. Well.
Life can be bad also.
Do you know that he recently got divorced? Okay. My friend?
Warren Buffett.
Warren Buffett. You say money too, like Peter. When you associated wealth with what word? With money? Or?
Money also, but I think his personal life is also quite
Oh, all right.
like good.
Mm-hmm. Dragons. I'm really interested here with.
He would make a perfect nasty red dragon.
Okay. Warren Buffett.
Yeah.
Elon Musk as well. With him, the case is that he's maybe not happy, but he said on multiple occasions that it's not happiness that's most important in his life. It's making the change that's most important.
Mm-hmm.
I'll go for a different one. David Goggins.
Please explain. Give us a background here.
David Goggins is kind of like a guy who was in the military, and he came out of the military. Is now an ultra marathon runner, running like 50 marathons a year. And yeah, I'm really impressed by him, and he seems very wealthy in the sense that he's happy.
Mm-hmm. Viola.
Maybe my boss is doing what he wants, he has money, he's satisfied.
All right. That's yes. It's also live transmitted. John.
Elon Musk.
Elon Musk and.
We do not exclude ourselves.
No, you can say yeah, of course.
Me, I feel wealthy, I feel comfortable. It's perfectly convenient.
All right, but that's perfect answer. That is a perfect answer. That is a perfect answer. Yeah, but it shows us that the associations with the wealth these days are not very obvious. This is not something universal that we immediately answer in the same manner, starting from dragons, finishing at happiness. So it's like it's like not an obvious, it's a nuanced question. But historically, I would say, and this is my question, my first question to Christian. Historically, I would bet that wealth meant probably fortune in a very material way back in the day, at least in our civilization. I'm asking you as a historian, what was the meaning, historically speaking, of the word wealth?
I think wealth was associated with power also, because in the past days, in the ancient times, for example, they were very much interrelated, not too much entrepreneurship. For instance, if Pharaoh wanted to build a pyramid, he didn't, I don't know, need to make a study if it's feasible for the market. You know, he made the pyramid in order to glory himself, in order to be closer to the gods, and he used all the resources the society had in order to make his wish come true. And maybe in the ancient times, we can say that the pharaohs were wealthy people. Let's say Ramses II or Tutankhamun. Then in the medieval times, we can think about the powerful church, the Catholic Church, for instance. And I don't know, let's go to the Renaissance period and think about what the Florentine Republic did with the Medici family. And, you know, you all know Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo and Raphael, for instance. And then the Pope has been, I don't know, maybe the most powerful guy in Italy. Yeah, he used all these resources, and he, I don't know, he painted the Sixtine Chapel. And we can argue that the Pope was also powerful, so he was powerful and wealthy. Then, in the modern times, let's think about the Industrial Revolution, for instance. And maybe then there was a change in the paradigm, in the way of thinking. Because people who weren't associated with the political power started to become wealthy. Maybe that is the moment when the things changed. And industrialists from England, for instance, starting from the late 18th century and early 19th century, started to become wealthy without having direct power, let's say, direct political power. And nowadays, of course, the public in contemporary times explained what wealthy means. Pretty good.
So when you listen to the answers, well, they were, nobody mentioned the word power. Yet, when we hear the current debate on various economic issues, especially related to the richest, to the billionaires who have a lot of wealth, they are also being spoken about, talked about as having a great power over our lives. You said that there was this period, 200 years, of the reverse, I mean, of the trend of splitting between, of the split between wealth and power. Do you think that we are living now in a period when it again becomes somehow going hand in hand?
Of course, they are interrelated. We can't separate them perfectly. But I think that in the past 200 years, the humanity made this transition. From the transitions from the times when power and wealth were interrelated, were almost synonyms, and now they're not, I don't know, they're not synonyms anymore, but they are interrelated somehow.
Thank you. I'm wondering because you work in the tax area. You are a great defender of the tax competition. So this is not very popular attitude these days. Politically correct is to say that we should fight with tax havens, we should harmonize taxes all over the world, and so on. You do something else, and the people who are in favor of this harmonization, they say, well, it's in order to implement a just system in which billionaires cannot grab their money, hide their money, before somehow steal them from the workers, whatever, from the society, and it's in order to ensure a system in which billionaires also have some limitation on their powers. Because when you reduce the amount of money they have, you somehow limit the power. So when you work with those people or around those people in those issues, do you feel that with wealth, this is also when you become wealthy, when you want to reduce the taxes, the effective tax rates that you're paying in some tax haven, that you do it in order also to gain some influence, to gain some power. What is your feel on those matters?
Listening to the previous answer reminded me of a Walter Williams quote, and I won't have it exactly right, but he said something to the effect that prior to capitalism, you got rich by enslaving and impoverishing your fellow man. With capitalism, you get rich by serving your fellow man. And what that, in my mind, the insight of that quote is that capitalism is a system with a growing pie. Pre-capitalism, there was a fixed pie in the economy. A king got rich by enslaving and abusing the peasantry, and feudal lords got rich by impoverishing the serfs, things like that. In a capitalist economy, those constraints don't exist. And in the world of taxation, this is a critical thing to understand, because our friends on the left genuinely seem to think that the world is still that fixed pie, that if one person becomes rich, Elon Musk, Warren Buffett, the names that were mentioned, then the rest of us, by definition, have to be poorer as a result. Now, that is so obviously anti-empirical, so clearly false, but nonetheless, maybe just because genetically we descended from hunter-gatherers, where that was our lives for millennium. Overcoming that is probably the biggest challenge I have. I have literally sat down with some of my friends on the left and said, well, here's the data, and you go to like a completely non-free market website, like Our World in Data, Oxford University. There's nothing free market or classical liberal or libertarian about that site, just straightforward data. And you can go to that site and look at per capita GDP, or the Madison data, University of Groningen, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, in the Netherlands. There are all sorts of websites that show long-run data on per capita GDP. Basically, the world was flat, no income, then capitalism, and then income has skyrocketed. And you show them that data, and you say, look, there are lots of rich people, but look at how everyone became rich. And it's like you're running up against some sort of religious fundamentalism in these folks on the left. My greatest failure is that I have never come up with a way of explaining it to them in a way that will actually stick. Yes, they'll look at the data, okay, yeah, that data's right, but 10 minutes later, they're back thinking that a rich person is rich because a poor person is poor. And I welcome anybody who can tell me how to explain that in a way that actually changes minds.
Mm-hmm. I have a question to Robert White, who is like a perfect member of this panel. His interest is in business ethics, the philosophies of capitalism, and the nature of morality of profit maximization. So at least that's what's said on the Free Market Roadshow official website. So if that's true, well, all three discussions before somehow touched the subject of how we perceive our well-being. And the answers of our guests were suggesting that they somehow identify well-being with wealth, well-being with wealth. So is it a mistake on their side? They use the wrong definition, or maybe we are witnessing some kind of a change of the meaning of the word, where wealth does not mean only having a lot of money, a lot of fortune, a lot of houses, and so on, but also it's extended to cover some other areas as having a fulfilling life, being able to having a nice hobby, and so on and so on. What is your take on that?
I would not equate wealth with well-being. And that I think these are two distinct concepts. You have the concept of wealth, which I do equate with money, and I do equate with purchasing power. If you look at the examples that were given before in this room, you know, we went around the room and people said money, life, and so forth. But when we looked at the concrete examples that people gave of people who are wealthy, there are people who have a lot of purchasing power. You know, Elon Musk, Bill Gates, and so forth. So in terms of wealth, I would equate wealth with purchasing power, but I would not equate wealth with well-being. I think wealth is a broader concept, well-being is a broader concept than wealth. But I think that wealth is actually a really important part of well-being. You know, our lives are better when we are wealthier. So before we talked about growing the pie, you know, it's not a fixed sum. How do businessmen grow the pie? By producing goods and services. All right, how do businessmen become wealthy? By producing goods and services. Most of the goods and services that we see today did not exist a few years ago. iPhones is an example that came up before. But even beyond iPhones, think of microwave ovens, dishwashers, modern cars with their safety features, planes. You know, the fact that we're recording this, you know, and can broadcast this, you know, did not exist at some point. So, you know, growing the pie means producing new goods and services, and those goods and services make our lives better. You know, try navigating around a new city. This is my first time to this particular city. I've been in Poland before, but my first time here. I had no difficulty getting here today. Why? I have an iPhone. You know, a few months ago, I drove from Atlanta to Chicago in the US. No, first time I've done this. No difficulty. I have an iPhone, you know. So that wealth, that creation of wealth, you know, in terms of the iPhone and the technology on the iPhone, has made my life better. You know, to give you another example, I'm currently in Bulgaria, originally from New Zealand. My parents, my family are in New Zealand. You know, in terms of communication between me, my son, and his grandparents, you know, 10, 15, 20 years ago, you know, you have to phone them up. You don't see them. It's just a voice on the phone. Now you have FaceTime. Now you have Skype. Now you have Zoom. This gives a whole different dimension. So, you know, the people who created Skype, who created Zoom, they created wealth. And that wealth hasn't improved my life. And it has improved the lives of the people in this room. So I would not equate wealth with well-being. I do think these are different concepts. But they are connected. You know, we need wealth in order to have well-being. that the creation of goods and services enhances and improves our lives. It extends our lives, and it makes the lives we have better.
Thank you so much. Tomek, yes, please.
Can I just add something real quickly to what he said? Other people's wealth increases my well-being. And let me just give you a quick example. William Nordhaus at Yale University, not a classical liberal or libertarian, just an economist, he estimates that of the sort of super entrepreneurs out there, they capture 2.2% of the wealth they create for society. So in other words, 97.8% of the wealth that's created by these super entrepreneurs is going to the rest of us. That's something to celebrate.
I agree completely.
Tomek, so from what has been said up till now, we can conclude that focusing on purely material wealth is like good thing because other things follow. So well-being as a result, to some degree, of course, of our ability to use various tools of our wallet and so on. Well, and this has been a traditional approach in public policies. The focus on so-called GDP per capita as a main indicator of the growth of the wealth of the country is still mainstream. So do you think that this is the only perspective that we can have on those things?
Thank you for this question. The simple answer is no. I don't think that this is the only perspective. But I want to say a few comments to the previous panelists and some short comment in favor of dragons, because I think that you mentioned a lot of things related to wealth, to be wealthy. The majority of many of you thinks that money is the synonym of being wealth. The power is the synonym of being wealth. But what wasn't mentioned, at least openly, is relationships. Being in relation, sense of belongings. So maybe if you are a guy who is a person who is a dragon like us, so maybe this is the way to achieve to being wealthy, to feel happy, and this is something which we have to remember. As I remember, one of the best predictor of happiness is being in good relationship. So this is what is important. You mentioned that we should distinguish between being wealth, yes, and well-being. This is true. It's good to making distinctions. But when I read your report, I think that this movement going beyond GDP, this is the way to go from wealth to think more about well-being, so to think more general about this. And I think that GDP per capita is not a perfect measure. So I'm sympathetic to this project to going beyond GDP.
Yes, but since we already have our little experiment and we see how the opinions on what does it mean to be wealthy can differ, are we able to come up with anything other, at least equally universal as GDP is? Because that could be quite problematic. Yes, because when you look at this actually you talked about this happiness economics. When you look at it from the methodological point of view, it doesn't pass the test. just does. It's based on so many strange and different assumptions. That's one thing. The second thing, the kind of measurement you do for this is the weakest in science, because you base all of your research on what people say about their feeling of happiness. So again, the question. Is there any alternative or any credible tool that we can measure our wealth in this extended version?
So I think that at least one well-known alternative is Human Development Index. Yeah, this index measures not only GDP, but also scholarization. And what else? It was health, yes, and the third part is health. So it's broader than simple GDP per capita. But when I analyzed the index wealth national index, which you invented, I realized that this index is highly correlated to GDP per capita. It's not surprising because it's based on GDP per capita. But I also noticed that it's more than 90% correlation. So it's very high. But what I think you want to add to this GDP. How I can interpret your effort is that you try to combine the preference approach to well-being with I would call it the objectivist theory approach. Because in this second part, when you include the public spending, you mentioned, for instance, national defense, internal security, environment, healthcare, education, social protection, freedom of speech and assembly. So this is a list of values which you consider important, which you consider that it's somehow impact well-being. So my understanding is that if we try to do something new, go somewhere beyond GDP, that we always try to combine two different aspects: subjective aspect of well-being, which is related to preference fulfillment, and the objective, that we know that some things, as time, as health, as comfort, is important.
Thank you so much for your insight. Dan wanted to add something.
I was just going to add that in addition to the Human Development Index as an alternative, the OECD has something called the Better Life Index. Exactly. But I was also going to add what he said, which is these things are highly correlated with per capita GDP. So, how do you tease out? There are some unhappy rich misers in the world, and there are some very happy poor people in the world. But all things being equal, we'd all prefer to be rich.
Well, to be honest, this last panel was designed to be a short panel. So I'm switching to the question side of it. Yes, please.
I would like to make a few remarks directly to Daniel. Full disclosure at the beginning. I am liberal. I am Hayekian liberal. This is important because this liberalism means that it's not the free market which is value. The real value is the well-being of people. As long as free market can contribute to the improvement of people's life, it's valuable, right? But if it's detrimental in certain spheres, so then the big improvement or the big contribution of the Hayekian thought is that the institution or the society may evolve. And if we have a free society, free market, based on the liberal values, so then we may evolve towards the direction which is better for the improvement of human rights. Why I'm talking about that? Because it strikes me, actually, when you were talking about the taxation, tax evasion, tax havens, and about the capitalism which contributed hugely to the improvement of human lives. And I think that there are two important remarks. One is about justice, and one about the well-being. Let's start from justice. I'm sorry, I don't want to prolong the discussion. I try to somehow to be consistent with this. If you said the super entrepreneur contributed 2.2% of wealth for himself and the rest was to the society, that's what I understood. And you said, well, that's reason for celebration. I would say, I have no idea whether it's the reason for celebration, because in the intuition of justice which people have in a society, it depends how much other people are contributing, right? So as long as you do not have any comparison, you don't know whether 2.2% is a huge number or not. And the same refers to the tax haven and tax evasion. If we agree, I don't know, maybe an anarchist, and you say taxation is in principle something bad. But if we are on the same page and we say that certain taxes are necessary in the society or in the state to contribute to some, I don't know, public services or public duties of the government, whatever we name it, so then instantly there appears the idea of justice. I mean, how much taxes the particular citizen should contribute to the state budget, right? And then this idea of justice is not something which is objective in Hayekian terms. It's strongly dependent on our intuitions. I mean, so I may say, okay, I'm a poor person, maybe I can contribute 10% of my income, but this guy, or this one is the very rich one, he can contribute much more, right? And if you ask people what are they thinking about that, so then they think, well, this guy is a bad guy because he is escaping with his wealth or with his incomes to the tax haven. And the second remark, this was about justice. The second remark is about the efficiency. I mean, at the beginning I said that Hayekian liberalism was about the well-being. And we got something in the theory of taxation like theory of optimal taxation. The basic question is, how much can we tax the people having in mind the needs of the government so that it's not detrimental to the efficiency and to the economic development, right? And it's an empirical question. We can ask that question. And if we find that there are people who are trying to cheat on the system and they are escaping from the taxation to the tax haven, so then we may conclude, okay, they are out of our equation and we need somehow to be severe against them. Okay, if you could comment on that, so I would be happy.
All right, you made a bunch of points, and my aging mind will probably forget some of them, but I'll try to answer. The Nordhaus research, I confess that it's been decades since I read his paper, but I think it was based on the market value of companies that these people created and versus their personal wealth. That certainly would seem to be the most logical way. That strikes me as very straightforward and acceptable. Now, I remember thinking at one point, of course, what is capitalism about? It's creative destruction. So a super entrepreneur who comes along and invents a computer is probably destroying the typewriter industry. So did that calculation factor in the destruction of the typewriter industry? I confess I don't know. It's just been too long since I looked at it. With regards to taxation, which I gather was your bigger point, I'm not an anarcho-capitalist. I don't like taxes, and taxes clearly, taxes clearly are taken from us at the point of a gun, ultimately, because if we decide not to pay, sooner or later government agents will come.
I want you to pay too.
Yes. However, in the previous panel, someone made a comment that I think, unless I imagined it, democracy is two wolves and a sheep voting what to have for lunch. I don't think that populism designed to whip up hostility to the rich and let's have 95% of the people vote to rape and pillage 5% of the people, I view that as fundamentally immoral. So I have no desire to defend untrammeled majoritarianism. I think that's an evil system. That's a system that gives you slavery, it gives you death camp, all sorts of bad things come about from it. But where do you draw the line? America's founding fathers tried to draw the line by creating a constitution that said the powers of the central government are limited to these 18 items in Article 1, Section 8. Now, we no longer comply with that, unfortunately, but there are ways, Hayekian ways, where you try to design rules in a society to limit the ability of the masses to try to exploit minorities, whether they're racial minorities, political minorities, religious minorities, or wealth minorities. I want everyone to be treated equally, and so in terms of tax policy, I want a simple, low-rate, flat tax. With a simple, low-rate, flat tax, rich people will pay the vast majority of the tax revenue. That's what happens in Hong Kong and Singapore today. The example I always love to cite is what happened under the Reagan tax cuts. My left-wing friends say, oh, those are big giveaways for the rich. Well, what happened? In 1980, with a top tax rate of 70%, those making more than $200,000 a year paid $19 billion in tax to the government. By 1988, when the top tax rate had come down from 70% to 28%, how much did those rich people pay to the government?
Probably more.
$99.7 billion, a more than five-fold increase in tax revenue. Why? There was much less incentive to use tax havens or to use legal tax loopholes when the tax rate was reasonable. Now, I still think 28% was far too high, and I still think that was immoral at some level, but at least we're getting closer to the level that I think is reasonable. So I think if you have a reasonable tax system, rich people won't have much incentive at all, because when you hide and shelter your money, you're probably using it inefficiently because the gains from tax evasion are greater than the losses from the inefficient investments that you're probably limited to, the higher bank fees that you pay for having to, someone hide your money and stuff like that. So again, I admit, I don't know where you draw the line on some of these things, but I know one thing for sure, I don't want the untrammeled majoritarianism and the persecution of people simply for being rich.
Let me ask you a question, maybe to all of you, and you can answer whoever wants. I'd like to connect this discussion with the ESG discussion because it somehow it got the common points. So some very left-wing critics of ESG, because there are such people, say ESG is a tool invented by the great corporation to kind of monetize on those climate, environmental issues. The real way is to do the degrowth thing, so to reduce the size of the apple, reduce the economy, because we are wealthy enough. We don't need more wealth. What we need is to deal with all those problems. Do you think that the notions of being wealthy enough, this notion is legitimate, I mean, in any possible circumstances? On an individual level, it is possible to become we call it rentier. I don't know if the same word is in English, but you have a lot of money and you say, well, I don't want to earn money anymore. I will live out of the interest rates and now I will enjoy some other things. But is it legitimate also on the collective level?
The rule of thumb I've heard, and maybe John with his Silicon Valley friends can verify this, you're rich if you can stop working and live the rest of your life without working. You're really rich if you can stop working and live the rest of your life and leave more money when you die than you had when you stopped working. In other words, you have a big enough pile of assets that the income from your assets is more than your living expenses. Yes, on an individual level, it's possible to be plenty rich. Societal wealth, on the other hand, we have a giant challenge. All of our nations are suffering from demographic change. Now, when I say suffering from demographic change, I have lots of gray hair. I think it's good that we're living longer. And when I say suffering from demographic change, I obviously think women and families should be able to decide how many children they want to have. But When you have tax and transfer welfare states that were created decades ago when we had population pyramids, and we're living longer, and we're having fewer children, those population pyramids are becoming population cylinders. We are in deep trouble. All of our societies are in deep trouble. What happened in Greece about a dozen years ago is about to happen in Italy the moment the ECB stops propping up and buying all their debt. And it's going to happen to the rest of our societies. In other words, we don't have nearly enough wealth to deal with the promises that politicians have made and that people have become accustomed to. So we are heading towards some really cataclysmic fiscal and economic outcomes because there simply won't be enough taxpayers around to fulfill the promises that have been made to what will increasingly be very elderly-centric populations in the Western world. And if anybody thinks we can just now sit on our hands and not create more wealth, that day of reckoning is going to come much faster.
Thank you so much.
Let me rephrase your question. So I would phrase the question like this. Do we want companies to stop producing wealth? To stop producing goods and services? Do we want Apple to stop producing new products? Do we want Google to stop producing new products? Where do you draw the line and how do you stop? That we want innovation. We want companies, Apple or the next Apple, to be coming up with new products that we can't even imagine today. To stop producing wealth, it means stagnation. It means, think of it like this. Imagine if someone in the 1950s had said, we've got enough wealth, let's stop. We would not have the products that we have today. And we're better off because of them. And our children and our grandchildren will be better off because of the products that are coming, that we can't even imagine at the moment. Now, in one of the earlier panels, there was a discussion about AI. We're in the early days of AI. I can't even project what's going to come next. So stopping wealth means, we've got enough. Let's leave AI, let's turn AI off because we've got enough wealth. And to that I say no. I'm excited about what's coming. I want to live a long life. Thanks to the technology that's coming, I should be able to live a long life and to see the possibilities of AI. So I regard anyone who says that we've got enough wealth today and we need to stop, I regard that as anti-life.
If I may, short comment. I don't think that the problem is with stopping of producing new products. It's rather about produce the new products or new services in a different way or according to different rules. And I think that as a society we can invent new products, new services and new rules. So this is, I don't think it should be scary. Regarding this, problem about our contemporary society, these challenges, maybe we should stop fear redistribution. I know that you don't like taxes, and when I mention redistribution, it means that it is somehow connected with taxes and transfer system. But there are some empirical papers, works, even wrote by the staff of IMF, where we can find that some kind of redistribution can improve growth, can improve steady growth. So maybe we should think about a different way of I don't know, creating of operating our economy.
I have a few comments. First of all, I think that wealth should be measured only with economical instruments. I don't think that we should go in the well-being department, because if you go in the well-being things, we'll end up with other ideologies or religions, or maybe ideologies and religions in the same time, like communism or fascism. For instance, I don't know, maybe it's not the best example. Karl Marx said that the human being is altruist, is an altruist human being, so is not selfish, as Adam Smith stated. You know, and we can end up in other places. Second of all, I want to say that the redistribution that our colleague is talking is maybe the idea of John Stuart Mill, who came and said that we can separate production to distribution, and maybe inspired by John Stuart Mill, we have the welfare states, where they, I don't know, maybe they super tax the companies and they redistribute this wealth. But in my point of view, I don't think a society can work for so long using this system. And about the demography, and I think that the demographic issues that Mr. Mitchell said are real issues. Also, Romania faces some kind of these issues. Maybe there is a demographic delay. Maybe individuals respond to these demographic provocations, but on the long term. Maybe, I don't know, individuals from a society will see that we have less children, and maybe we will become more poor. Maybe they will respond, and in the long term, they will, I don't know, they will regulate the production of children, if I may say like this. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, please.
Sorry, can I just comment on redistribution?
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, just keep in mind what redistribution means. It means taking wealth by force from those who produced it and giving it to those who did not produce it. I want Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos to keep their wealth, and I think I'm better off when they keep their wealth.
May I?
Please.
There, on this question of redistribution of wealth, there is a continuous, automatic redistribution of wealth that's happening continuously thanks to innovation. 30 years ago, only the very wealthy had cell phones. Today, everybody, including the subsistent farmers in Guatemala, have cell phones, and it's pulling them out of subsistence level living. So my sense is the amount of redistribution that we're doing from a tax standpoint and a government social services standpoint is actually a drop in the bucket as compared to the redistribution that's going on continuously and automatically in terms of improving quality of life for people. If you look at, so 1 billion people have been lifted out of poverty in the last decade. It would be interesting to see what percent of those were lifted out of poverty thanks to government redistribution of services, of funds. My guess is it's a small percentage and a small amount. Most of those people have been lifted out of distribution thanks to technology being able to make things more affordable for them and them being more productive. I wanted to say one other thing, if I may, and that is how envy, it's a beautiful example in my mind of how envy makes us irrational and negatively impacts our happiness. Surveys have shown that if economy passengers on airline flights have to pass through first class seats, the first class section, before they get to their seats, they're less satisfied with the flight than would be the case if they don't have to pass through first class and see the large comfortable seats that the first class people enjoy before they get to their seats. And of course, you know, it's in their minds, I'm sure, that, oh gosh, those people are enjoying such comfort and I have this tiny little seat that I'm stuck in. But the fact is, those of us in economy should be grateful to those people in first class because they're subsidizing my seat. My seat is cheaper than it would be otherwise if it weren't for the people in first class. So rationally, I should be grateful, not and happier, thanks to the first class people. Of course, we're institutionalizing envy, it seems, in so many ways to make it more acceptable and to justify the redistribution of wealth. But it's not a good strategy, it seems to me.
I'll just correct one thing you said, John. I think you'll probably agree. It wasn't redistribution that lifted 1 billion people out of poverty. It was the pie growing. In other words, we weren't redistributing, we were expanding the pie.
Yeah,
and
okay.
That expanding the pie is probably 99.8% of what lifted people out of poverty, and government programs at best. I suspect government programs actually trap people in dependency and have a negative effect, but for the sake of argument, I'm willing to grant maybe 0.02%.
I'd like to add that market transactions are usually not called redistribution. This is the first issue. But the market transaction is usually not called redistribution. So I don't buy it. Your description is simply sounds strange to me. And the second thing is,
but it is a form of redistribution, isn't it? I mean, if you get to enjoy the benefits of new technology that you couldn't previously,
and I pay for this.
Well, I mean,
and the company wants to sell me.
But there's a huge,
and if they want to sell me, they have to produce it in affordable price, and I am able to buy it. If they want to, you know, sell their services only to Bill Gates, fine. I would not have this.
Well, there's such a huge consumer surplus. I mean, how much do we pay for Google Maps, for example? You know, we pay a monthly fee for the internet and something for a device to access it, but apart from that,
I guess we have to make some links to the previous panel about data, paying by they use our data.
This is the discussion about definitions regarding that. If we take something by force from one person, give to another, then it's redistribution. If we produce the surplus, it's splendid, it's awesome. Okay, but that's not the redistribution, in fact.
Exactly.
That's my point too.
And mine too. And I would like to add one more thing, that when I mentioned this word redistribution, I had in mind that redistribution not only, you know, is a cutting pie, but also contribute to extending pie. So this is in line with your thinking.
So I'm in line with Dan's thinking. I would call it I would call it compulsory distribution as opposed to distribution. Some of which is automatic and spontaneous, some of which is and a result of, I mean, if you're growing a pie, almost certainly redistribution is taking place because the percentages of the pie held by any individual are unlikely to stay exactly the same as that pie grows, right?
Can I just suggest a different term for redistribution in the sense that John is talking about, and that is trade. No, trade. It's a trade, it's an exchange.
Okay, this discussion is becoming purely academical. We are talking about definitions right now, so
I would call trade non-compulsory redistribution.
Okay, one last question from Martin, and we're ending.
It's actually a very short question. I've had it, or I heard it said once that in Europe the countries love the flat tax so much that they actually have 5 of them or even more. So my question to you is, because of the tax brackets, my question to you would be, from the standpoint of strategy, would it be better to have a flat tax implemented gradually, so getting rid of one tax bracket after the other, or should we just implement the flat tax at once?
I guess I'm politically agnostic in the sense that I'm in favor of whatever works. My guess is that since one year's legislature or parliament can't bind another, the best thing is to do it as fast as you can, because you never know what the next election will bring, and maybe they'll cancel it or delay it, or if you have a chance to do good policy, do it, and do it as quickly as you can. And plus, do it as soon as you can, because you want to make sure that there's time for the benefits to kick in before the next election. So when I advise politicians that are looking at it, don't wait 3 years into your 4-year term to do it, because you might not reap the any good political results from it.
There are some countries in Europe that do have a flat tax. Bulgaria is one example of this. It has a 10% flat tax. I believe the flat tax actually came in shortly after the fall of communism. The finance minister who actually introduced the flat tax was on our board of trustees, and there's been discussions about having a progressive tax system. So far, hasn't happened, and I think once you get that flat tax, it's a lot more difficult to remove. So I'd be in favour of doing it as quickly as possible, because otherwise you open up the opportunity for people to challenge it and to go back to the previous system.
All right. Thank you so much for the discussion. Thank you all for attending the conference. And this is the end. Next year, see you.